At 2 a.m, a woman ran through dark streets while a stranger hunted her. She hid in driveways, crouched behind hedges, running for her life. A car prowled up and down the road in quiet pursuit. The police later dismissed her fear. 24 hours later, a teenager was murdered. 7 years after that, the Suffolk Strangler began killing again. The first warning came in the early hours of Saturday, the 18th of September 1999. A 20-year-old woman named Emily Doherty was walking near the junction of Pickett's Road, Felixstowe, when a car stopped ahead of her. The engine was still running and the driver's door was open. A man stood in the darkness next to it. Emily froze with fear and her survival instinct took over. She started to run for her life. She hid in driveways and crouched behind hedges and gardens. She listened as the car crept slowly along the road, quietly searching. Just when she thought she was safe, the man appeared again, close enough to force her to run once more. At one point she picked up a stick, the only weapon she could find. She hid while the car passed again and again. He continued to hunt her for 40 minutes. Eventually, Emily banged on doors until one opened. A stranger let her inside, and immediately they called the police. Emily gave a description of the man and a partial number plate. It was a dark burgundy Ford Granada Scorpio. It was enough to narrow the search, but not enough to stop what came next. The police didn't take Emily or her story seriously enough. There was no urgent follow-up, and therefore no arrest. That warning was ignored and an opportunity was missed. Just hours later, Victoria Hall vanished. She was 17 years old, 2 weeks from her 18th birthday. Victoria had been out with her best friend at a nightclub in Felixstowe. After food, they walked part of the way home together. At around 2:20 a.m, they parted ways near the high road in Trimley St Mary. Victoria had less than 300 yards to reach home. She never arrived. 5 days later, a dog walker found her naked body in a ditch beside a field in Creeting St Peter, 25 miles away. She had been abducted, strangled and discarded. Suffolk police investigated, but this case soon went cold. Steve Wright lived nearby at the time, in Runnacles Way, Felixstowe. He worked shifts at the docks. However, he wasn't working that weekend. The day after Victoria's body was found, Wright went to work and reported an injury to his left arm, quite unusual for a man known to work through pain. Days later, he part-exchanged his old car for a new one, changed his phone number and had taken out a series of loans. 3 days after that, he left the country for Thailand. Investigations uncovered that his time in Thailand was part of a pattern of visiting red light areas. He returned to the UK in January 2000. For the next 7 years, Steve Wright lived quietly. He worked, he drank, he blended in. He lived with his partner, Pam Wright, and to the outside world, nothing about him suggested violence. But psychologists would later say the silence mattered. Serial killers rarely begin late, sometimes they wait. In October 2006, Wright moved into a house on London Road, Ipswich, the centre of the town's red light district. Within weeks, women began to disappear. Between October and December 2006, 5 women disappeared and were later found murdered in and around Ipswich. All 5 women were involved in prostitution and struggled with drug addiction, making them vulnerable targets. Tanya Nicol, 19, was the youngest victim. She disappeared in late October and her body was found in early December in Belstead Brook. Gemma Adams, 25, was reported missing in mid-November. Her body was the first to be discovered, also in Belstead Brook. Annalie Alderton, 24, was found in woodland near Nacton, posed in a crucifix position. She was 3 months pregnant. Paula Clennell and Annette Nichols were both found together in a remote area. Both were the victims of brutal violence. All were small in stature, all were discovered naked, all had likely been killed by asphyxiation. The community was gripped by fear and horror as bodies kept being discovered, prompting a massive police investigation. Police patrolled the streets, women stopped going out alone, The media gave the killer a name, the Suffolk Strangler. The investigation moved quickly, and it wasn't long before Steve Wright was arrested just before Christmas. DNA taken years earlier for a theft linked him to all the victims. The odds of the DNA belonging to anyone else were described as 1 in a billion. In 2008, he was convicted of 5 murders and sentenced to a whole life order. But the story didn't end there, because killers like Wright don't start at 48. In 2024, advances in forensic science finally reached back into the past. Intimate swabs taken from Victoria Hall were retested using new DNA profiling, a method known and designed to isolate the male Y chromosome, even decades later. The result pointed to Steve Wright. So did CCTV footage from a petrol station on the A14, captured less than 4 hours after Victoria was last seen alive, showing a man resembling Wright just miles from where her body was found. Faced with this strong evidence, this left Wright with no option but to plead guilty to the murder of Victoria Hall and to the attempted abduction of Emily Doherty the night before. Emily was the first warning and Victoria was the first kill. These convictions came 26 years too late. Steve Wright will die in prison. What remains unanswered is how many times he stood in the dark before somebody noticed, how many engines idled, how many doors never opened. Because the most dangerous killers don't look like monsters. They look like men you've already walked past.